Welcome, my friends. I am going to share a little bit with you today about fulvic and humic acids, what makes them so profoundly unique and different, and how they play into supporting your immune system. We are looking at the possibility of a lockdown here in Austin, Texas, and people are really frightened. And to me, still, the most important thing we can possibly do is to support our immune system. And ultimately, what does that mean? It means to stay calm, to look for the silver lining in all this for you and your family, whatever that might be, and to do things that bring you joy, love, and happiness, and to support your immune system as effectively as you can. And I know of nothing that can do that more effectively for you than working with fulvic acids. And the reason why, and I know I keep coming back to this over and over and over again, but the reason why is that nothing supports your mitochondria's production of ATP more effectively. And it does it by providing nutrients to you and by taking out toxins. So I want to remind you that still focusing on drainage is always number one. Making sure that your bowels are open so that as we support your upregulation of your body's ability to support releasing toxic substances from so that your mitochondria can do what it needs to do, that's still the first thing that has to happen. But simultaneously, we can work with increasing the function of your ATP. So let's look at some of the reasons and information why, and about fulvics and their unique and amazing function. So just so you know, fulvic acid comes from a shale, and that shale is actually a humic shale. Typically, if we were to look at it from a paleological point of view, it's extraordinarily old, but it's also far more superficial than things like oil and gas and coal, which are much deeper in the earth and have had powerful effects of the pressure of the weight of the earth on top of it, which compresses it a whole bunch. The humic acid and the humates are from the shale that's closer to the surface, but it's all ultimately from plant and animal substances that have broken down into tiny molecules over time. And what has been done with humic acid is that has been broken down into nano-sized particles that are fulvic acids that have these very unique qualities. One of the amazing things about a fulvic acid is that not only does it help to repair free radicals, but it literally has the ability to turn them into nutrients. And one of the most powerful examples of this is where fulvic acid was added to an area that was a salt mine, where the salt mine was 14 inches thick. And obviously you can't grow things in salt. But fulvic acid was sprayed on it, and then alfalfa seed was thrown on it. And some of the most nutrient-dense alfalfa was grown on what became black, rich soil from the addition of the fulvic acid. into that salt bed. Now that is amazing. So imagine that kind of transformational power being employed in your body from all of the food that you may have eaten in the past that I tend to call frankenfood. Excuse me for being so judgmental about it, but many of the things that people call food don't even have a real food source in the beginning, or they are so preserved and have so many chemicals on them that it's hard to imagine them having much of anything as what we might call a food base. But real food, nutrient-dense food, where plant nutrients and minerals are available, soil minerals are available, can help us with anti-aging and disease prevention and remedial effects if we've been ill for a long time, and basically just in overall improving the functions of our body. So the SAD diet, the diet that most people eat here in the United States, when they've looked at it, has only 17 to 19 nutrients in it at all. And in order to function properly, we need a minimum of 73 to 90 nutrients. 17 to 19 is a far cry from 73 to 90 nutrients. Now, many people are taking supplements that are not made from plant-derived vitamins and minerals. Real plant-derived vitamins are all polysaccharides, basically a specific type of sugar that's made from the sun. So a vitamin is actually sunlight that we're being nourished by. And almost everything that we get in the form of a supplement, including the vitamin C that everybody seems to be so hot for these days, is made with a chemical base rather than a food base. And I'd just like you to think of, let's say, your car in order to run, or your engine in order to run, needed 73 to 90 volts. Do you think your car would run if you only had 17 to 19 bolts and screws to put in it? I don't think so. And if you needed 73 to 90 bolts in a major part of an airplane and you only had 17 to 19, do you think you'd want to get on that airplane? And yet here we are doing that to our bodies, making choices that don't even provide us with any of the basic support that we need for these bodies to be able to function. Let's see what we can do about getting real food. In the 1950s, 50% of everyone had their own garden. And now in the United States, it's 2.5%. That's not a very good sign of the levels of nutrition that we might be having. So let's look at what we can do, and let's also be very aware of what we're doing to our soil and our earth if we are using Roundup instead of eating our dandelions. We're poisoning them. And have you seen what happens when you put some Roundup on a dandelion? You have this bright, happy green and yellow flowered plant that literally just crumples in front of you. It dries up, it loses all of its life. And we are all being exposed to this glyphosate. And thank God, fulvic acid has the capacity to help pull that glyphosate out of our system, or we would be dehydrating ourselves from the most important life-giving waters from our own mitochondria that we desperately need in order to function. So, fulvic basically has the capacity to act like a delivery person. Let's imagine that we have a bus, and the bus has 60 seats in it. Fulvic acid has like 60 little areas where it holds specific nutrients. And if it comes to the bus, it will go to the place where there are these 60 seats. And it will scour with its capacities to discover what's in those seats. And it will look to see if there's anything toxic in those seats. And the first thing that it will do is, because of its capacity to transmutate, it will go to those things and it will attract those toxins and pull them out of your body. And then it will go back in and scour those 60 seats and see what's necessary to be replaced. What nutrients are important to be replaced. It has this tremendous capacity to basically to adapt. If you've been in the alternative field for a while, I know you've heard the term adaptogen. Well, there is no more powerful adaptogen than a fulvic acid, because a fulvic can survey the needs of your body. And then, like, let's say for instance that one of your cells didn't have enough zinc, and you need that zinc to fulfill a chemical process for a tissue. What can happen through the fulvic is that the fulvic reads that, and even if it's not high in zinc itself, it will transmutate the foundation energy of the fulvic acid into producing zinc from it and deliver it to your cell. It's absolutely extraordinary. So it will give us what we need. And because of that adaptogenic process, it's able to really help us where we have deficiencies that are keeping our body from being able to deal with toxins. Now, one of the things that we need to understand is that we have some very basic needs in our bodies. 70+% of us is water, and what's floating inside of that water is all of the minerals that are found in the periodic table. And then we are microbes. And it's so interesting because I know we've talked about mitochondria some, but we haven't talked about it from the standpoint that a mitochondria itself is a microbe. It's actually a bacteria. And it existed in the ocean far before there was human form, far before there was animal form or fish form or anything else. It's a very powerful, primitive bacteria that's responsible for producing energy. And one of the most fascinating things about it is that mitochondria are in every living thing, be it a plant, be it a fish, be it a bird, be it an animal, be it a tree. They're all filled with different mitochondria, and part of what makes them unique is their color. It's really interesting. And different colors of natural substances have different qualities, like polysaccharides, things like that. Like we know, for instance, that those things that are red are really high in polyphenols and actually have a lot more antioxidant than vitamin C, particularly if it's in a natural form. So everybody's out there scampering for vitamin C right now, where you could get just as much, if not more, benefit by having a live form of polyphenol from something like pomegranate or beet or some beet juice. So we want it as enzyme-rich as possible. Chewing on pomegranate seeds, drinking or smashing some pomegranate seeds and having some pomegranate juice, the skin of an organic, natural apple, anything that's naturally red will have more antioxidant capacity in it than vitamin C, particularly if it is not a live plant-based form of vitamin C that is made with unnatural components. Many of them come from the oil and gas foundations, and those things are toxic to the body. So even having a lesser number of milligrams from something that's natural in the vitamin C, in the antioxidant realm, can be far more beneficial to us than something that is not. And blueberries also are extremely high in antioxidants. Raspberries. So those are things you might want to consider adding to your diet right now because of the antioxidant capacity. But even more important is something like a fulvic acid-based mineral, which is a plant-based mineral that has fulvics attached to it that will help to bring the fulvics right through your cell wall, through your mitochondrial walls, through actually both mitochondrial membranes, and right into the center of your cells, into the center of your mitochondria, to help your body produce energy. And when we do that, we have the capacity to start moving out those things that prevent our bodies from doing what we want them to do. So we might want to think about the energy production process of our mitochondria kind of like a wood stove. And what happens is we place wood into the wood stove, which would be like nutrients, and then the mitochondria would burn them up, and what we would have left would be free radicals. And basically, what our bodies can do if we have enough fulvics is that it can break down those free radicals and utilize them by pulling them out of the body and through the digestive system as long as the colon is open. So we come back again to the importance of drainage. The other thing that's important for us to look at is our bacteria are extremely important to us. Mitochondria is one of those bacteria, and there are varying numbers of percentage of the overall cells in our body. People have said that there's as many as 10% of all the cells in our body are bacterial forms, the whole family of bacteria and microorganisms. And then the DNA of those microorganisms can be extremely high, percentage-wise, much greater than human cells. So the DNA of our microorganisms can be extremely high. And what happens is that if we don't have what we need to feed them, then we can get ourselves into trouble. So we have anaerobic bacteria and we have aerobic bacteria. Aerobic bacteria are the good guys. They're the ones who love and need oxygen. And if we're healthy, 85% of what we are utilizing is our oxygen. And if we're not healthy, we can use a lot less than that. And we need that oxygen in order to support the healthy, beneficial bacteria, which include the mitochondria. What gets in the way is sugars. And that's what we need to produce anaerobic bacteria. And the anaerobes are the ones that are the problem causers. There have been people who have won Nobel Prizes for showing us that anaerobic bacteria are that which contributes to things like cancer and inflammatory diseases and all the things that plague humanity now, brain function loss and all of that in its various different neurological forms. But that which supports healthy functioning, energy, high quality life, brain function, and all the rest is oxygen, oxygen-loving foods. And it's interesting that people who crave sugars are typically people who are inundated with anaerobic bacteria because the anaerobic bacteria is making you crave sugar so they can continue to live, so that they can get the food that they need. So we want to look at some of the most foundational things that we can do to support ourselves, like making choices of food that are the most nutritious for us. And what does that mean? We want food that doesn't kill good bacteria. And one of the most powerful killers of bacteria is pesticides. You could actually say that a pesticide like glyphosate or Roundup, but DDT or any number of the many pesticides that are out there, is pesticides are antibiotics for the plants and the soil. They're literally killing the good bacteria in the soil, which allows for the healthy minerals in the soil to be made available to the food. So pesticides literally basically cut down the amount of good nutrients that are available to our plants. So what I want to encourage you now, while you're looking at the need to have a stronger immune system during this time of the coronavirus, is to consider buying your foods as organic as possible. You're not going to be able to go places as easily as you did before. Why not use this time to start an organic garden? It looks like it's the beginning of spring here in Austin, and maybe in other places in the country too. It's a great time to put in a garden where you know what's in the soil, and to start actually, believe it or not, using humic-based and fulvic-based plant food. You'll end up with the most nutritious fruits and vegetables that you could ever imagine, because that helps to rebuild the nutrients back into the soil. It's really interesting. One of the things that we've discovered, there's so many, I could talk for days about the benefits of fulvics, but one of the things that fulvic acid does is it feeds plant-based probiotics, fulvic-based bacteria. And so we can actually start to get the good probiotics that we need from our food when we're increasing our fulvic content of our foods and our supplements. So there are scientists now, scientists who are actually behind the whole line of CellCore Biosciences products. And those supplements are basically all fulvic-based. They have specific fulvics. There are really thousands of different types of fulvics that we can avail ourselves of and that our scientists have availed themselves of. And they choose fulvics, and then they support those fulvics in such a way that they can combine them with drivers in order to help those specific nutrients get to where we want to. Now I'm going to tell you something that's kind of unusual to imagine, but for those of you who've been with me through our discussion of homeopathics, this may make sense to you. So let's start out by considering something that's very toxic to the human brain in particular, and that is a heavy metal called aluminum. And when aluminum comes from, let's say, the petroleum industry or the steel making industry, that aluminum can increase people's brain cancers and Parkinson's and early dementias, and on it goes. I mean, it's just horrendous for what happens to the brain when it's exposed to a salt form of aluminum. But broccoli, believe it or not, has very high levels of aluminum, but it's not a salt-based aluminum. It's a very different valence, for those of you who know chemistry, than a salt-based aluminum like that comes from industry. And the natural form of aluminum that's in broccoli acts as what we call a driver. And so if we want a nutrient to be able to go through the blood-brain barrier, if it has a plant-based aluminum in it, then we can carry that nutrient into the brain because it has been attached to a microscopic amount of the plant-based aluminum. Without it, that particular nutrient could not make it into the brain. Isn't that interesting? So for instance, when somebody is aluminum toxic, we'll give them a homeopathic or energetic form of aluminum, and that will tell the autonomic nervous system that it's time to release aluminum. And if we also have on board fulvic acids, that will also support the process of moving that aluminum out safely, out through your open drainage system through the bowel, and not get reintroduced through the bloodstream. It's an amazing process, this whole process of the drivers that can super benefit us. So I know people have asked about the Tudca Plus because Tudca has melatonin in it. But melatonin in this case is not in a substantial amount to cause drowsiness and support your sleep process. But just like our discussion of aluminum, that melatonin is a driver into the brain to carry the tudca into the brain and into other tissues in the body so that we can benefit by the support in these other organs that the melatonin is a perfect driver for. So there's not physical levels of melatonin in there, just informational levels to function as a driver. It's pretty amazing. And as you know, tudca is one of the products that we use in our very first phase. What we're doing with these calls right now, or these little YouTubes that we're making, is providing you with the information that you need to understand some of the intricacies and the special gifts of phase 1 of our protocol to restore your health. So I know many of you are really concerned these days about your immune system. And I wanted to talk a little bit about your white blood cells. And the first thing that we need to do is have a well-fed system. And obviously, toxic foods loaded with pesticides don't fit into that realm. But let's talk a little bit about white blood cells. White blood cells are made in the long bones, in the marrow of your bones. And then those white blood cells are shunted over into your thymus. And the thymus acts like a little school where you begin to get some guidance into what these white blood cells are going to be doing, because there are many different types of white blood cells. So they kind of get differentiated in the thymus, and then from the thymus they're shunted into the intestines. And the intestines become like a trade school with numerous different trades for the different functions that your white blood cells are going to be doing for you. Now, what do you think would happen if the trade school was totally disorganized and it was a completely toxic environment and everybody was piled on top of each other and there was horrible air quality and toxic exposures everywhere, and you weren't able to sleep like you needed to sleep, and all those kind of things? Do you think that those white blood cells would get a good training? Or do you think they might end up a little bit deficient in their capacity to learn what they need to learn? If things are funky in your intestines, if your intestines are not healthy, strong, and happy, in other words, if we're toxic, then your functioning of your white blood cells is not going to be up to snuff. However, if your white blood cells are in an organized environment, the teachers are healthy, clear, and strong. They have great charts teaching you how to do your job and your function. They give you hands-on experience and provide you with everything that you need in order to learn your job well. Which white blood cells would you want? In order to create the second situation, it really helps if our mitochondria are working well so that they can make sure that the environment is clean and not polluted, and that your other organs have what they need, like we talked about going into that bus and giving the specific needed nutrients to each participant on the bus and moving out the things that are keeping it from doing what it needs to do. We'll be talking more in depth about some other things like radiation and how that affects the possibility of the full functioning of our mitochondria and our cells. But what we want to do is get the benefit of those fulvics on board for us as we are jumping in to our new jobs and taking care of ourselves in an immune system's threat. So if you really want to do what you need to for yourself, the first most important thing is stay calm, be happy, and then the second most important thing is to get some fulvics on board while you're nurturing yourself with real food, ideally food that's grown in our area, wherever that might be. If you're here in Austin, the Weston A. Price Foundation, they should be able to tell you in your chapter, because there's different chapters for every part of the United States, where you might actually be able to access boxes of homegrown vegetables from small farmers in your area. And they, because of what's going on now, may be willing to deliver, because they're certainly not going to be able to sell like they were able to before in the farmers markets. So I just want to make sure that you understand that what I'm talking about as far as getting boxes of food delivered to your house from the farmers is possibly something, a way to get around the challenge that we have now, where we have limited access to stores. However, one thing I want to point out to you is more people die every day from cancer and autoimmune diseases than has ever happened, and certainly is happening now from the supposed coronavirus in itself. So honestly, this is what I call an awesome time for a wake-up call. I personally had colon cancer over 35 years ago, and that was my wake-up call. I have not treated my body with the type of disrespect I did before ever since that time. I have placed so much more trust and love and care into the nourishment of my body than I ever did before once that happened. That was my wake-up call. I pray that you don't have to have something like cancer as a wake-up call. Let's use this coronavirus as a wake-up call to begin to start really honoring the wisdom of our bodies, and to not go crazy when our bodies are trying to help us out by releasing some toxic substance and having an inflammatory response that's uncomfortable for a little while. Let's not run to get rid of the discomfort, but let's honor the body's process and support it in moving through it. And we talked a lot about that yesterday. But quick reminder is to not use things like aspirin and Advil and things that bring your temperature down. If you have a temperature, that's because your body wants to support you in moving toxic materials out of your body. But you could simultaneously be taking some fulvic acid substances. And we have an oxygen product that is ever so much more than just oxygen. It's fulvic acid based, but it's much more than just fulvic acid, because it's very high in hydrogen, very high in oxygen, and very high in carbon, the three things that our bodies are made out of. And they're all in therapeutic levels that help to stimulate your own body's healing mechanisms. Like, for instance, I'll take a drop of that and put it on my skin if I get a burn immediately afterwards, and the pain will go away, because it has all of these things that stimulate my own body's ability to heal itself. Hydrogens, carbons, and oxygens in much higher levels. And it also gets rid of free radicals. and has this amazing redox potential. So it's got these extraordinary capacities in it. And at the same time, of course, I'll take mito-ATP, which in itself is a mitochondrial product, but also has some of the oxygen product in it. So it's fascinating. I want to come back to fulvic acid's different abilities, and we talked about how it's an amazing adaptogen. Well, one of the other things it adapts to is our different pH needs. So every organ in the body has an optimal pH that it functions with. And there is a huge misnomer out there that we're supposed to be alkaline. And we're supposed to be eating alkaline producing foods all the time. But I'll tell you that if you were to take baking soda in water, which is extremely alkaline, before you eat, you wouldn't be able to digest your food. Because in order to digest, our stomach needs to be extremely acid. Like 0.2 even. And our scale for acidity and alkalinity goes from 0.1 all the way up to 14, 7 being neutral. So 0.2 is extraordinary acidic. And we need an acidic environment part of the time. And if we don't have that acidic environment, we are not able to digest, break down our foods, or even produce any bile. So I know we talked a little bit yesterday about bile, but this is part of one of the beautiful things that we are supported by with fulvic acids is the capacity to support our body's pH flexibility in different organs. So our liver is more on the alkaline side. Our stomach is way on the acidic side. And our bile is on the alkaline side, it's 8.5. And our pancreatic enzymes are actually 11.2, which are extremely alkaline. And we are designed to have our food, once it comes into our body, sitting in what's called a chyme, a stomach acid bath for 2 to 2.5 hours of 0.2 to 2, an extremely acid environment in the stomach. And then about 2 to 2.5 hours in, there's a release, if you have a gallbladder, of bile from the gallbladder, which creates an alkaline environment, which basically balances that acidity that's in the stomach so that our chyme can start moving along in the digestive process. And simultaneous, pretty much, it's just a tiny bit after, the bile is sent in to the chyme. The pancreatic enzymes at 11.2 are added, and that basically creates a mini digestive explosion which completely neutralizes, and that explosion process produces so much energy that it breaks down the rest of the food that didn't get broken down with the stomach acid alone. So the way that our body knows how much alkalinity and how much bile and pancreatic enzymes to produce has to do with how acid our stomach is. And that's one of the reasons why it's so beneficial to possibly have something like, one of my favorites is sauerkraut juice before you eat, which will stimulate the release of more of an acid environment to help break down your food. My second favorite is a blend of apple cider vinegar and lemon juice, which I might add some different herbs to, like slices of fresh turmeric and ginger and cinnamon bark. And I might take a tablespoon of that and add that to a small glass of water and drink that 15 minutes to half an hour before I eat. So it's either going to be that, or I've grown to love sauerkraut juice. I didn't when I first experienced it, but now I love it, and that's my absolute favorite because of its probiotic support and stomach acid support simultaneously. And then, if neither of those work for you, you can try betaine hydrochloric acid pills. And another thing that I do personally is, because our oxygen product supports that acidity in the stomach so effectively, I might take 10 drops of that and put that in some water and drink that before we eat as well. And I happen to love the taste of it. It has quite an interesting flavor, kind of soury, and I love sour. These are all things that can help us with the pH, but we need to have acid and alkaline. We need to be flexible. And the idea of just being alkaline or drinking alkaline water, to me, is one of the biggest wastes of time and money and overall harmful to the body if you're not aware of the times when it's important to be alkaline. And that's only 2.5 hours after you eat, and up until about an hour and a half before you eat, that you might want to increase your water with alkalinity. But to me, we're much better off having just pure water so that our bodies can make the healthy water. The healthy water is not what we drink. The healthy water is what our mitochondria make for us. It's another thing that the mitochondria does. It structures water for us. And it makes a deuterium-depleted water that carries information more effectively through our bodies than anything else. Which brings us to another thing that this amazing mitochondria and fulvic acid helps us with. And that is the electrical potential of our cells and mitochondria. Because we need to have high electrical potential to produce energy. And that is one of the things that the fulvic acid does for us. So all of the products, other than one parasite product whose job it is to stick to actual parasites and pull them out of the body, and to stick to biofilms and pull them out of the body. Everything else has a fulvic acid driver or base to it, so that we get all of these amazing supportive processes in every nutrient that we take from CellCore Biosciences. It's pretty amazing. It has to do with understanding the electrical potential, the atomic aspects of who we are as humans, the electrical and light aspects of who we are. It's just fascinating. And some people have asked, well, what are vitamins? Because we've talked about minerals. We want plant-based minerals, right? Not salt minerals, because salt minerals actually have a toxic effect. And a few minutes back we talked about how aluminum is a salt-based mineral that's toxic, but it has a capacity, it has a job, which is to cross the blood-brain barrier. But if it's crossing the blood-brain barrier, bringing something toxic that disrupts the flow of mitochondria in the brain, it's not a good thing. Whereas the aluminum in our broccoli crosses the blood-brain barrier, bringing a healthy form of aluminum to the brain, which pulls the toxins out because it supports the mitochondria in there. And then we no longer are having a toxic brain situation that might contribute to Alzheimer's, as the research shows. So we're also increasing the electrical potential so that we can more easily produce more mitochondria in the places that we need them, like the brain, like the liver, like the kidneys, like our muscles. So that's another thing that the fulvic acid does for us. So one thing that's really interesting to note is that the longer a cell carries an optimal charge, the longer they will survive. It's a lot of work to replace cells. And a healthy electrical charge is nourishing and supportive and provides actual energy to the cell. And of course, the mitochondria is very much involved with providing that electrical charge. So all these things come together. And when we have a strong electrical charge, we are supporting the mitochondria and vice versa. Everything is in harmony with each other. A healthy electrical charge is therapeutic against degeneration and aging. And we naturally have more of that charge when we're first born, and over time we produce less. So by supporting ourselves with fulvics and getting real food in our bodies, and reducing our exposure to toxic things whenever we have any control over it, we're helping to support our body's degenerative processes. And we're in that support of building healthy, new, regenerative, restorative cells. So I would like to also just mention that there are adaptogenic nutrients that come from plants that are very helpful for us. And we talked about how fulvic acid and also tudca has incredible adaptogenic functions. But we can actually have some adaptogenic ways of dealing with ourselves. And what I mean by that is, it's a little challenging on our bodies if we've been eating nothing but junk food and then we say, I'm going to do this huge change and start doing some kind of a big juice fast or something like that. So my recommendation is that we start slowly and go gently and give our bodies a chance to slowly adapt. Because one of the things that we've discovered is that the ability to adapt is what chronic illness is all about. If we can adapt, we won't carry a chronic illness. We'll just have a detox process from our bodies, and we'll be done with it, and our body will have learned from the process, and it will adapt. So we want to learn from our bodies and basically adopt adaptive types of behaviors. When we start our CellCore program, for instance, there may be a recommendation to take 2 bowel movers in the evening and 1 bowel mover in the morning. But I recommend that people start with just 1 bowel mover at night and give your body a chance to adapt. And we can look at what the function is. Our purpose is to try and have 2 to 3 bowel movements a day. If that doesn't happen with 1 bowel mover at night, then the following morning we might want to go ahead and add 1 more in. And if we still aren't getting those bowel movements, then in the evening we can add a 2nd. So you see how we can start to slowly adapt rather than to force a huge change on the body really quickly, which can oftentimes cause a huge detox reaction that can be uncomfortable for us. So we want to apply that, and it's actually a very kind and gentle way to deal with nourishing and loving ourselves. where we start with small amounts of things that are beneficial for us that might be encouraging the release of toxins and help our body to get used to this new process, because very few of us have actually experienced the power of something like fulvics. And the mito-ATP is one of the most powerful in helping to move out some types of toxins that most of us haven't realized that we've been exposed to for a very long time, like radioactive isotopes and the antibiotic effects of the different pesticides like the glyphosates in our lives. So, my friends, I think I've given you plenty to chew on for today. I invite you to give me a call if you have any questions about what we've done so far, what we've talked about so far. Please feel free to share this little YouTube with your friends. And I just invite you to look into your heart and look for the things that bring you the most joy, the most peace, and the most happiness. Get outside as much as you can to breathe fresh air, barefooted if the temperature allows, even in a bathing suit if the temperature allows, to give your body the incredible gift of the light rays which feed our mitochondria, particularly in the early morning hours and of sunrise and first couple of hours and sunset. And take good care of yourself and your loved ones. Make this a special time for you to get to know each other more and to share with the people you love the most. Take care.